Mary held her 6-year-old son William's hand tightly as their old wooden wagon rolled slowly into the small town of Meadowbrook. The wheels made creaking sounds on the dusty dirt road. The streets looked so different from the big, busy city they had left behind just 3 days ago. There were only a few small buildings and houses scattered around the main street. Mary was only 27 years old, but she felt much older. Her face showed the tiredness of someone who had seen too much sadness. Her husband had died from a terrible illness long years ago. When he died, he left her with nothing but old debts and a heart full of pain and sorrow. She remembered when she was young and full of dreams. Back then, she had married her husband through letters they wrote to each other. She had never even met him before their wedding day. She was hopeful then, believing that love would grow between them over time. But life had been much harder than she ever imagined it would be. Now she was coming back to her childhood town with little William. She was praying in her heart that someone, anyone, would remember her family from the old days. Maybe someone would be kind enough to offer them help. She had nowhere else to go and no other choices left. The prairie wind was cold and sharp. It cut through their thin clothes like a knife. William shivered beside her on the hard wooden seat. His small body was pressed close to hers, trying to stay warm. Mary pulled her worn shawl tight around both of them, but it did not help much against the bitter wind. "Mama, are we going to be okay?" William asked in his sweet, high voice. His big blue eyes were full of worry and fear, even though he was only 6 years old. He seemed to understand that something was very wrong. Children always know when their parents are scared. Even when the parents tried to hide it, Mary looked down at her precious little boy. She squeezed his small, cold hand in hers. "Yes, my love, we will find a way. We always do," she said, trying to make her voice sound strong and sure. But deep inside her heart, Mary felt scared and completely alone. She was trying to be brave for William, but it was very hard. She reached into her small cloth purse and felt round for her money. There were only a few coins left, not enough to buy food for more than a day or two. She had no idea where they would sleep tonight or where their next meal would come from. The thought made her stomach feel sick with worry. As their wagon rolled slowly down the main street, Mary looked round at all the unfamiliar faces. People stopped their work to stare at the strangers coming into their town. Some women whispered to each other behind their hands. Mary felt embarrassed and ashamed. She knew she and William looked poor and desperate. Everything in Meadowbrook had changed so much since she was a little girl living here. The old general store where her father used to buy supplies was painted a different color now. The church looked smaller than she remembered. Even the big oak tree in the center of town seemed different somehow. She felt like a stranger in the place where she was born. The wagon driver, an old man with a gray beard, finally pulled his horses to a stop in the dusty town square. The horses snorted and shook their heads, happy to rest after the long journey. The driver climbed down from his seat and walked round to help Mary and William down from the wagon. "Here you are, ma'am," he said in a gruff but not unkind voice. "This is as far as I go." He lifted their small bag of belongings from the back of the wagon and set it down on the dusty ground. It was a pitiful sight. Everything they owned in the world fit into one small, worn bag. Mary thanked the driver and gave him her last dollar for the ride. He tipped his hat to her, climbed back onto his wagon, and drove away. The sound of the wagon wheels and horse hoofs grew quieter and quieter until they disappeared completely. Mary stood there in the middle of the town square, holding William's hand. She felt completely lost and did not know what to do next. People were still staring at them. Some looked curious, others looked suspicious. No one came forward to help or even to say hello. The sun was getting lower in the sky, painting everything round them a golden orange color. Soon it would be dark, and the air would get even colder. Mary knew they needed to find shelter somewhere, but she did not know how or where. She closed her eyes for just a moment and whispered a quiet prayer. "Please, God," she said silently, "give me strength and hope. Help me find the way to take care of my precious William. I do not know what to do anymore." William tugged gently on her hand. "Mama, I'm hungry," he said softly. Mary opened her eyes and looked down at her beautiful little boy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new problems to solve. But tonight, she just needed to find somewhere safe and warm for them to sleep. She picked up their bag with her free hand and began walking toward the nearest building, hoping someone inside would have a kind heart. As Mary stood in the town square feeling completely lost and alone, she noticed a tall man walking toward them. He had kind brown eyes that seemed to shine with warmth even in the fading daylight. The man wore simple work clothes, a cotton shirt that had seen many washings and sturdy pants that were clean but well worn. His boots were covered with dirt and mud from what looked like a hard day of working on a farm or ranch. The man walked with slow, careful steps, as if he did not want to frighten Mary and William. When he got close enough to speak, he gently tipped his worn hat in a polite greeting. His voice was soft and gentle when he spoke. "Excuse me, miss," he said in a quiet, respectful tone. "I hope you don't mind me coming over to talk to you. My name is James Thompson. I couldn't help but notice that you and your boy look like you might need some help." Mary felt her cheeks turn red with embarrassment. She knew that she and William must look very poor and desperate standing there with their one small bag, but she was also filled with such desperation that she was willing to talk to this stranger. She had no other choices left. "I'm Mary," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "and this is my son William. We've just arrived in town on the wagon, and I'm very much afraid we have nowhere to go tonight." She looked down at the ground as she spoke, feeling ashamed to admit their terrible situation. James looked at Mary with eyes full of understanding and kindness. Then he knelt down on one knee, so that he was at the same height as little William. His voice became even gentler when he spoke to the child. "Hello there, young man," James said with a warm smile. "You look very tired from your long journey. That must have been quite an adventure, riding in that wagon for so many days." William looked up at this strange man with wide, curious eyes. He nodded his head slowly, but stayed pressed close to his mother's side. William had learned to be careful round people he did not know. His small hand held tightly to Mary's dress. James could see that the little boy was shy and maybe a little scared. He did not try to push William to talk or come closer. Instead, he stood back up and looked at Mary again. His brown eyes were full of understanding, as if he knew exactly how difficult things must be for them right now. "I have a small cabin on my ranch," James said, speaking slowly and clearly. "It's been empty for about 3 months now. Ever since my hired hand moved on to find work in the next county. The cabin is clean and warm, and it has everything you need. A good stove for cooking and heating, 2 beds, and even some dishes and blankets." Mary's heart began to beat faster with hope, but she was also worried. She had learned that most people wanted something in return when they offered help. "You and William are very welcome to stay there while you get settled in town and figure out what you want to do next," James continued. "There would be no payment needed until you're back on your feet and earning money again. I know what it's like to have hard times." Mary's eyes suddenly filled with tears. But these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief and gratitude. She had been so scared about where they would sleep tonight. She had been imagining them huddled together under a tree or in some cold, empty building. Sir, I couldn't possibly accept such kindness from a complete stranger, Mary said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. You don't even know us. How do you know we can be trusted? How do you know we're good people? James smiled warmly, and his whole face seemed to light up with genuine happiness. Well, we're not strangers anymore, are we? Now we know each other's names, and that's a good start, and everyone deserves a helping hand when they need it most. That's just the way life should work. He paused for a moment, and his expression became a little sad, but also peaceful. My late wife always used to say that kindness comes back to us when we need it most. She believed that when we help others, somehow the universe finds a way to help us to when our time of trouble comes. Mary looked at this kind man standing before them. She could see in his eyes that he was telling the truth. There was something about James Thompson that made her feel safe for the first time in many, many months. She could tell that he was a good person who really wanted to help them without expecting anything bad in return. She also used to say, James added with a gentle smile, that sometimes God sends people into our lives exactly when we need them most. Maybe that's what's happening here today. Mary felt a warm spark of hope growing in her heart for the first time in months and months. Maybe, just maybe, this small town of Meadowbrook really could be the place where she and William would find the new beginning they so desperately needed. Maybe their luck was finally starting to change for the better. Living in James's small but cozy cabin, Mary worked very hard every single day to prove that she and William were worth the kindness James had shown them. She wanted to make sure that James never felt sorry about his decision to help them. Mary had always been the type of person who did not like to take things without giving something back in return. Every morning, as soon as the sun came up over the prairie, Mary would wake up early and walk to the vegetable garden behind James's main house. The garden was full of tomatoes, carrots, beans, and other vegetables that James had planted but did not have much time to take care of properly. Mary spent hours pulling weeds, watering the plants, and making sure everything grew strong and healthy. She also noticed that James's clothes were old and worn, with many small holes and tears in them. In the evenings, after all her other work was done, Mary would sit by the oil lamp and carefully mend his shirts and pants with needle and thread. Her stitches were small and neat, and she took great pride in making his old clothes look almost like new again. But Mary's greatest joy was cooking meals in James's kitchen. For the first time in many months, she had enough food to make real, hearty meals. She would cook thick beef stew with vegetables from the garden, fresh bread that made the whole house smell wonderful, and apple pie made from the fruit trees behind the cabin. The delicious smells filled James's lonely home and made it feel warm and welcoming again. William was changing too, in ways that made Mary's heart sing with happiness. Under James's patient and gentle care, the little boy was becoming more like his old self again. Before his father died, William had been a cheerful, laughing child. But after the sad time that followed, he had become quiet and serious, like a little old man instead of a 6-year-old boy. Jane seemed to understand exactly what William needed. The kind rancher taught the boy how to scatter corn for the chickens. Every morning, he showed William how to collect the warm eggs from the nests without frightening the hens. Most exciting of all, James taught William how to milk Bessie, the gentle brown cow who lived in the barn. Hold the bucket steady, William, James would say in his patient voice. That's right. You're doing a fine job. Bessie likes you very much, William. would giggle with delight when he managed to squeeze milk from the cow into the bucket. His laughter echoed across the ranch like music, a sound that had been missing for so long. It was the first time William had laughed with real joy since his father had died 2 years ago. One sunny afternoon, Mary was sitting on the porch of the main house, carefully mending a torn shirt that belonged to James. She could hear voices coming from the pasture behind the barn, and she looked up to see what was happening. "Look, Mama," William called out in an excited voice. "Mr. James is teaching me to ride the pony." Mary put down her sewing and watched as James led a small, gentle pony around the fenced area. William was sitting on the pony's back, holding onto the saddle horn with both hands. His face was glowing with excitement and pride. James walked beside the pony, one hand on the rope and the other ready to catch William if he started to fall. But William was doing very well, sitting straight and tall like a real cowboy. Seeing her son so happy made Mary's heart feel lighter than it had in years. And yes, she watched as James patiently showed William how to hold the reins and how to make the pony stop and go. James never raised his voice or showed any sign of frustration. Even when William made mistakes. In the evenings, after all the work was done and William was asleep in his small bed, Mary and James would sit together on the porch of the main house. They would watch the sun go down over the prairie and listen to the peaceful sounds of the night. Crickets chirping, owls hooting, and the gentle lowing of cattle in the distance. James would tell Mary stories about the land and the animals that lived on his ranch. He told her about the family of rabbits that lived under the porch, about the red-tailed hawk that hunted mice in the fields, and about the wild flowers that bloomed in different colors throughout the year. Mary found herself sharing memories of William's father with James. She told him about the letters they had written to each other before they married, about William's birth, and about the happy times they had shared before illness took her husband away, slowly, day by day. Mary began to feel safe again. For the first time since her husband's death, she was not constantly worried about where their next meal would come from or where they would sleep. One evening, as they sat watching the stars come out, James turned to Mary and spoke in his gentle voice. "You don't have to work so hard, you know," he said. "You and William are welcome here for as long as you need to stay. You don't have to earn your keep every single day." Mary looked at this good, kind man who had shown them such incredible kindness when they were strangers with nowhere else to go. "I've learned to stand on my own feet and take care of myself," Mary said softly. "But I'm grateful for your friendship, James, more grateful than you'll ever know." As autumn painted the prairie in beautiful shades of gold and red, Mary felt something growing in her heart that she thought was lost forever, real hope for the future. When winter came to the prairie that year, it arrived much earlier and much harsher than anyone had expected. The first snow began falling in late October, and it did not stop for many days. The wind howled across the flatland, piling snow into deep drifts against the buildings and fences. The temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in the buckets, and the animals huddled together in the barn for warmth. It was during this terrible cold spell that little William became very sick. It started with just a small cough and a runny nose, but within 2 days, William was burning up with a high fever that made him shake and shiver at the same time. His small face was flushed red, and his eyes were glassy and unfocused. Mary was terrified. She had already lost her husband to illness, and the thought of losing William too was more than she could bear. She moved a chair next to William's small bed in the cabin and sat there day and night, never leaving his side. Every few minutes, she would dip a clean cloth in cool water and place it gently on his burning forehead. "Please, God," She whispered over and over again as she watched her little boy toss and turn in his fevered sleep. "Please don't take my William away from me. He's all I have left in this world." Mary barely ate or slept during those first few days. Her eyes became red and swollen from crying and staying awake. She was so worried and scared that her hands shook when she tried to give William sips of water. When James saw how sick William had become, he did not hesitate for even a moment. He put on his heaviest coat and boots, saddled his strongest horse, and rode out into the blinding snowstorm. The wind was so fierce that he could barely see where he was going, and the snow was so deep that his horse struggled with every step. It took James more than 3 hours to reach the town of Meadowbrook, a journey that usually took only 1 hour in good weather. By the time he arrived at Dr. Roberts's house, both he and his horse were covered in snow and ice. James pounded on the doctor's door until the old man answered. "Dr. Roberts." "You have to come with me right away," James said, breathing hard from the cold and the difficult ride. "There's a little boy at my ranch who's very sick with fever. His mother is desperate, and I'm afraid we might lose him if you don't come soon." Dr. Roberts was an old man with white hair and a kind face. He had been the town doctor for more than 30 years, and he had seen many sick children during that time. Without asking any questions, he gathered his medical bag and his warmest clothes. The ride back to James's ranch was even more difficult than the trip to town. The snow was still falling heavily, and the wind seemed to be getting stronger. But Dr. Roberts never complained, even though James could see that the old man was very cold and tired. When they finally arrived at the cabin, James's coat was covered with melting snow that dripped onto the floor. "Don't worry, Mary," he said, stamping his boots to shake off the snow. "Dr. Roberts is the best doctor in 3 counties. If anyone can help William get better, it's him." Dr. Roberts examined William carefully, listening to his breathing with a stethoscope and feeling his forehead to check the fever. "This is a serious illness," he told Mary and James quietly. "But I've seen many children recover from this if they get the right care. The most important thing is to keep his fever down and make sure he drinks plenty of water." Through the long, frightening nights that followed, James never left Mary and William alone. He stayed awake with Mary, helping her care for the sick little boy every hour. James would heat water on the stove and bring fresh, warm soup for William to sip. When Mary was too exhausted to keep her eyes open, James would sit by William's bed and watch over him so that Mary could get a few hours of much-needed rest. One night, when William's fever seemed to be getting worse instead of better, Mary broke down and began to cry. She was so tired and scared that she could not hold back her tears any longer. "Why are you doing all this for us?" she asked James through her tears. "We're not your family. We're just strangers who came to your ranch with nothing. Why do you care so much about what happens to us?" James looked at Mary with eyes full of tender understanding and deep caring. He was quiet for a long moment, as if he was trying to find the right words to explain his feelings. "Because you and William have brought life back to this old ranch," he said softly. "For 3 years after my wife died, this place felt empty and sad. But when you came here, everything changed." William's laughter reminded me that there's still joy and happiness in the world, even after we've been through sad times. He paused again, and when he spoke next, his voice was even quieter than before. "And because," he said, looking directly into Mary's eyes, "somewhere along the way, without me even realizing it was happening, you both became family to me. You're not strangers anymore, Mary. You're the family I thought I'd never have again." Mary felt her heart flutter with an emotion she thought she would never feel again after her husband died. But she was still too afraid and too scared to hope for anything more than friendship. Slowly, after many more days of careful nursing, William began to get better. His fever finally broke, and his appetite returned. As he grew stronger each day, Mary realized something important. During those difficult and frightening days, she and James had grown much closer too. They had faced the storm together, and it had shown them both how much they had come to care for each other. Spring arrived on the prairie like a gentle miracle after the long, harsh winter. The warm sunshine melted away the last patches of snow, and soon the whole land was covered with beautiful wild flowers in every color imaginable. There were yellow sunflowers as tall as a person, purple lupines that swayed in the breeze, and tiny white daisies that dotted the meadows like stars fallen from the sky. William was completely healthy and strong again, running through the green meadows with more energy than he had ever had before. His cheeks were pink and full, and his eyes sparkled with joy and mischief. He spent his days helping James with all sorts of ranch work, feeling very important and grown up as he carried water buckets and scattered feed for the chickens. The little boy had also made a special friend during the winter months. James had a friendly ranch dog named Scout, a golden-colored animal with a wagging tail and gentle brown eyes. Scout and William were inseparable now, running and playing together from morning until night. The dogs seemed to understand that William was just a child and was always careful not to knock him down during their games. One beautiful spring evening, when the air was warm and sweet with the smell of blooming flowers, Mary and James sat together on the porch of the main house. They watched William and Scout playing in the meadow, chasing each other in circles and rolling in the soft grass. William's laughter carried across the prairie like music, filling the air with pure happiness. James had been thinking about something very important for many weeks now. As he watched Mary smile at her son's joy, he knew that the time had come to speak the words that had been growing in his heart. He turned to Mary, and she could see that he looked nervous and excited at the same time. "Mary," James began, his voice slightly shaky with emotion, "these past months living here together have been the happiest I've known in years and years. You and William have filled my house with laughter and love and warmth. This old ranch feels like a real home again for the first time since my wife died." Mary looked at James with curious eyes, wondering what he was trying to say. Her heart began to beat a little faster as she saw the serious expression on his kind face. James took a deep breath and continued speaking. "I know that you married your first husband for practical reasons, because you needed security and a place to live. But Mary," he said, reaching out to take her hands gently in his own, "would you consider marrying me for a completely different reason? Would you marry me for a love?" Mary's eyes immediately filled with tears, but these were tears of pure happiness and joy. She had been wondering if James felt the same way about her that she had begun to feel about him. During those long nights, when William was sick, she had realized that her feelings for James had grown into something much deeper than friendship or gratitude. "Oh, James," Mary said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I never thought I could love another man again after my husband died. I thought that part of my heart was closed forever. But you've shown me such incredible kindness and patience. You've been so good to William, treating him like your own son." She paused to wipe the tears from her eyes, and then continued with a voice full of certainty and love. Double quotes, "Yes, I will marry you, James. But not because I need shelter or security or someone to take care of us. I will marry you because my heart belongs to you now, completely and truly. I love you with all my heart." James felt as if the sun had suddenly become brighter and the flowers had become more beautiful. He pulled Mary into his arms and held her close, both of them crying tears of happiness. Their wedding was planned for just 1 month later. It was a simple ceremony, but it was filled with more joy than many fancy weddings in big cities. The whole town of Meadowbrook came to celebrate with them. The women brought beautiful wildflowers from their gardens to decorate the little church. They also brought homemade cakes and pies and fresh bread for the celebration afterward. William played a very special part in the wedding. He stood right beside Mary and James during the ceremony, wearing his best clothes and grinning so widely that his face almost hurt when the preacher asked if anyone objected to the marriage. William shouted out, "I think it's wonderful," which made everyone in the church laugh with delight. After the ceremony, when the preacher said that James could kiss his bride, William clapped his hands and said, "Now Mr. James is my new papa." James knelt down and hugged William tightly, promising to love him and take care of him for the rest of his life. That evening, the whole town gathered in the field behind the church for a celebration. Someone brought a fiddle, and someone else brought a guitar. Soon there was music and dancing under the stars. Mary and James danced together, while William and Scout ran around playing with the other children as they swayed slowly to the gentle music. Mary looked up at the stars and marveled at how completely her life had changed. Just 1 year ago, she had arrived in Meadowbrook as a desperate widow with a sick child and nowhere to turn. She had been scared, alone, and hopeless. Now she was surrounded by love, community, and hope for the future. She had a husband who truly loved her. William had a father who cared for him, and they had a whole town full of friends, sometimes. Mary whispered to James as they danced together under the starry sky, "The most beautiful things in life come from the most difficult and painful times." James smiled and held her even closer. "Love has a wonderful way of finding us," he whispered back, "even when we think all hope is lost and will never be happy again." Their story proved that with courage, kindness, and faith in better days ahead, even the darkest and most difficult chapters of life can lead to the brightest and most beautiful new beginnings. The end.